Hey everybody, it's Matt, one of your librarians at Dickinson Memorial Library, and I'm hanging out in my garden today. I hope you guys will hang out in the garden with me. Maybe you have a garden at your own home. It's a great time to garden. We're at the late end of spring. Summer is just about to start. Summer is a great time for gardening, but anytime is a good time for gardening. What do you need in a garden? Really not much. You can just use your hands. They're your best tool. I sometimes have other tools with me. I like to have a pair of gloves with me. And sometimes, here's some other tools. Sometimes I use this one to dig up the soil with, or a shovel, or a mini shovel. They call it a trowel. Those can be helpful. This one's helpful. It's called a hoe. Helps me get rid of a lot of weeds. But you really don't need much in the garden. I encourage you just to get out there and have some fun, plant some seeds, watch things grow, look at the birds and the worms while you're out there. There's a lot of fun stuff to do. Let's take a look at this garden bed right here. Here we have some plants, especially that are good for the cool season, for the spring more than the summer. When it gets too hot, they don't do that great, but they're good right now, like these radishes. There's some good radishes. Oh, little insect eaten. That's all right, no problem. You wash that off and that'll be tasty. And some spinach. You recognize that spinach? It's tasty right out of the garden. So some plants, you might notice, grow underground, like a radish, and some grow above ground. You eat the part that is the leaves or the greens. There are all sorts of different plants. What are some other vegetables that grow underground? Oh, there are carrots are roots, and potatoes are roots, and there are lots of greens we eat, like lettuce. So let's watch for which ones are we tend to eat the part above ground or below ground. These radish greens are edible too, but they're not that great unless they're cooked. They're a little bit bitter unless they're cooked. And another good cool season one are the peas. That's what's growing up on this trellis back here. Peas look like this, or the plant does, and then the part we eat comes off in a little pea pod with all the little peas inside. Now, why do you think we have that trellis growing back there? That is an old hammock, and it had all this netting on it already, and we use that because the peas use these little tendrils to wind up that trellis. They'll grow even taller than that if we had some support for it. Here's another plant that has some support. Can you see this cage there? This cage around a tomato. That also gives support to the plant. It'll grow up tall and the branches will come out, and those heavy tomatoes on there need some support so that the plant doesn't fall over. That's why we have supports in there. Here I got something else in there, something for the human support. You know why this rock is in the middle of my garden? Because it's a little too far for me to reach to the very back, but I can step on the rock. And then I can reach everything in my garden. So you want to make it easy for yourself. If it's too hard, you're not going to get out there in your garden, but make it easy. Give yourself what supports you need, what supports the vegetables and fruits need, so that you can have fun in the garden. Another support we use to make it easy is garden beds sometimes. Now they call this a garden bed, kind of in the shape of a bed. It's a big rectangle, and it's above the ground because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, when it's a little bit higher, it's easier to garden in it. Also, soil here is really sandy, And so that doesn't have a lot of nutrients in it. So we build up a bed and put soil in it that's nice and nutritious for our plants. So we don't want our plants too close together, or they will be fighting each other for the same nutrients. So maybe we'll show you up close. Here we are, down with our radishes. And sometimes it looks like they have to fight each other for the same nutrients in that soil. So I'm going to pull some out. So that other ones can have more nutrients to grow from. Let's look at these right here. There are some plants. Can you see those down there? They look like they have some good space. So I'm going to let them go. What about right here? Here are some plants. And let me give them some more space. Let's pull that one up so that there's more space for the other ones. Now sometimes, like with the radishes, we pull out the whole plant, but sometimes with the spinach, we'll just pull off leaves to thin it out. And we'll eat those leaves, and then the plant will be able to grow new leaves. It'll have new energy. It'll have energy to use on growing some new leaves. And these delicious greens we'll eat for dinner. So there's that bed with our peas and our one tomato growing up and our spinach still going strong. And we learned about supporting ourselves and supporting the plants. I want to show you one more thing in this bed. Look at this straw. What do you think that's there for? Any ideas? One reason people put straw down is to help prevent weeds from growing up. And we've got down there some dahlias, some flowers that we planted. Those are the old stalks sticking up. Like this. And we hope, oh look, there's some right there. Some new green will come growing up. And so we want to keep the weeds down and just let those flowers grow up big and strong. And so we put some straw down. The straw also helps keep the moisture around so that you don't have to water quite as much. But I want to look at some other beds here too. We're going to look at two beds that show us a couple of different things. We're going to look at this bed. And we're going to look at this bed over here. I'm going to see if you notice anything. Look how this bed is organized. There look to me like there are rows of plants in this bed. And you see this row here, that row there, and there's some markers at the top of each row. But this bed over here, boy, I don't see any rows in there. Let's talk about that. So some beds have their plants planted in rows, and sometimes I planted them just by scattering seed around. And I do that for a couple of different reasons. Sometimes it's easier in a row to tell what plants you have. You know that you planted them in a specific spot, and you know where to find them. But other times, it's nice when things grow up in a scattered spot because they support each other. They help each other stand up strong. You just want to make sure that, again, they're not fighting for the same nutrients, that they have plenty of area to grow. So here we've got a lot of cilantro right here. Here's some spinach, like our other bed. And here is some cilantro. This is also edible, right out of the garden. So in this bed, if things start to get too thick, I will pull out some cilantro and we will eat it. And I want to show you something else. I'm going to pop off the top of this spinach, show you something. Now, it looks like there are leaves there for sure, good edible leaves, but also in the middle there, it is starting to go toward a flower. So not producing these big edible leaves, but going toward producing a flower. And once it's done that, and then all its energy is going to start going toward the flower. So at that point, it's good to harvest that whole plant, eat all those leaves, and make room in your garden for something else. Or if you want it to flower, maybe because you like the flower, or maybe because you want it to produce seeds to make more plants, well then leave it and you can let it go to flower and let it go to seed and create something new. There are lots of options in your garden. Every garden looks different, and there are different times to do different things. Sometimes you want to grow things so that you can eat the greens. Sometimes you want to grow them so that you can grow up the seeds so that you'll be ready for next year with more seeds to plant in your garden. But in this bed, we looked at how sometimes you want your seeds scattered, whereas sometimes you want them in nice, even rows. It makes it a little easier. Let's look at a bed that has rows instead of scattered seeds. So here's the bed we were looking at that had some rows in it. These ones look like some mustard greens there. You can see the stone in the middle so that I can step into the middle of my garden. And I want to show you how these plants, you can eat them at different stages. These are mustard greens, and sometimes you can take out a whole plant, roots and all, and you can eat those greens. Those little holes in there, that's because the little insects have beat me to it. They're eating some of it. But that's okay. I'll eat the rest of it. I'll wash it off and eat it. Now, I can eat individual leaves on these, like I did with the spinach. Well, it's hard to do that one-handed. But there's my leaf. Or I can pull out the whole plant with the roots if I want to make space for other plants. So these are good little greens to eat. I can eat them just raw like a salad, or I can cook them in a saute. And I'm going to do both things in this bed. I'm going to eat the whole plant in these greens, and I'm also, every once in a while, going to take off just big leaves to eat those big leaves. And as they grow older, I'm going to give them more space, and those leaves will get nice and big. And when they're big, they're better to be cooked. Let's look at a couple other things in this garden. In this particular bed, what do we have here? Another stone for support. Ooh, let's look at these. Can you see on these plants? Let's move around here. There we go. Look at those little flowers on there. See those little yellow flowers? So this plant is starting to go to seed. So if I want to make space for other greens in there, I'll pull out the whole plant, or I can just leave that one up and watch it flower, and it gets pretty in flower. And here's a new one we haven't seen before. These are some bean seeds growing up. I've got sticks in the garden so that the beans can start growing up those sticks. And I've actually got 3 little piles here, and I'm going to make a teepee for these beans. Maybe we'll check in later in the summer to see how our bean TP is going. Here's some very little beans. And there's some slightly bigger beans. And I think I have a few too many trying to compete for each other in this spot. So, I'm going to take one out. It came from a bean seed. Now you can't eat these greens on a bean. That's okay. I'll just leave it there in the garden. It'll add nutrients to the soil. And then I'll let these 3 beans grow up on that one stick. We'll have a nice teepee of beans. Okay, so we talked about some cool season vegetables. We talked about which part of the vegetable you harvest, whether it's the root or the leaves. We talked about scattering seeds versus planting in rows. Let's see, I also want to talk about whether you plant seeds or you plant a vegetable that's already started. Down here in this bed, in that cage, you can see a slightly bigger, slightly taller plant. That's a cucumber that I bought as a start already, so that I didn't have to do it from seed. Sometimes you can get other people to start them for you and buy them that way. But seeds want to survive, so it's fun to go from seed too. We'll visit that bed a little later on, I think. But next, I think we want to go to this bed. Why do you think there are hoops on that bed? Can you think of anything we've thought of so far that would help you figure out why there are hoops on there? It looks kind of like a playground. And it is playful, but those hoops can be supports, like we talked about for the other plants, like the tomato cages or the pea trellis. I could tie up some of those plants to those hoops, and it would help support them, help them grow up big and tall. The hoops are also nice as during cold weather. I can put plastic around those hoops and keep the vegetables inside nice and warm. So in the early spring or in the late fall, before it gets too cold, but after it gets a little bit cold, it's hard for the vegetables to survive sometimes in the cold. I can cover those hoops up with plastic and help them last a little bit longer. But let's go next to this bed. Let's do a little bit of gardening work. This bed looks like it needs a little bit of work, so let's see what we can do. I see some rows planted, some hills up between them. Sometimes people plant in the hills, sometimes people plant in the valleys, in between the hills. It depends on how much water they think they'll get sometimes. These are some old peas. I'm going to take some of those out. They're really good for the soil, but now I want space to grow things. I'm going to get rid of some old seeds. I'm going to pull up some grasses, some things I know that I don't want in my garden. But that brings me to an interesting point. How do you know which plants you want and which plants you don't want? Well, if you plant them by seed, you know that you want the ones that you planted by seed. Or if you plant a vegetable start, then you know you want that one. But if you've got a random space with some things already growing in it, you might not know what's there. So sometimes you have to just watch and see what something turns into. But over time, you'll get to learn what different kind of plants are. And sometimes people call the plants they don't want weeds. But sometimes weeds are great plants. It's just a matter of perspective, whether you want that as something to eat or something to look at, or whether you want to call it a weed and you don't want it. There's a plant here in this bed and all over this garden. I'm lucky. It's called milkweed. That's what people call it. But it is a great plant for monarch butterflies. Monarch butterflies only lay their eggs on a milkweed plant. And so I want to be sure to keep a lot of milkweed in my garden because I love the monarch butterflies. This right here is milkweed, and it's growing up right in the edge of my garden bed, so I'm going to leave it there. I've got plenty of space in my bed for other plants. But right here in the middle, this one's a milkweed too. I'm gonna pull it out because I want some space for my vegetables there. I don't want all the space for the monarch butterflies. I want some of it for me and my family and my neighbors to be able to eat some good things. So I'm gonna get rid of some of what I think is a weed there, but I'm gonna keep some of what I think is a weed because it's beautiful for the butterflies. What else can we do in this bed? Well, we can see that there's some basil back here. Oh, I wish you could smell the basil. It smells delicious. And, oh, one other thing. Back here in the very back, I'll bring it up and show you. This is a plant that I planted. It's in a row back there. And I don't know what it is. I forgot to mark the row. So if anybody out there knows what this plant is, will you please let me know? I'm curious. I don't know if I want to keep it or if I want to plant other stuff there. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you forget. But it's a good reminder to mark the things that you plant in the garden. Whenever I'm planting, I always think, oh, I'll remember this. And then inevitably I forget something. So let that be a little reminder to mark your rows. Mark the things that you plant so that you know what you have. And if anybody knows this pretty flower, I don't think it's a flower. I think it's going to be some kind of vegetable. Here's what the seed looks like. Almost like a sunflower. I don't know what it's going to be. If you know, please let me know. Thank you. All right, everybody, that's our garden tour for today. I hope you had a fun time. I hope you get outside, whether it's going on a hike, spending time in your garden, looking for birds, looking for frogs, whatever you like to do to get outside. I hope you spend some nice time outside this spring and summer, and happy gardening, and enjoy some local produce, and happy reading, everybody. See you next time.